Man decided to help the sick lion. What happened after will shock you. The early morning mist clung to the savannah like a ghostly veil, turning familiar landmarks into shadowy mysteries. Ethan Carter guided his patrol vehicle along the narrow dirt track, his experienced eyes scanning the landscape for any signs of disturbance. After 5 years as a senior ranger at Nyota National Park, he could read the African wilderness like a well-worn book. Something was wrong this morning. The usual symphony of bird calls was muted, and even the persistent buzz of insects seemed subdued. Years of experience had taught Ethan to trust his instincts, and right now, every nerve in his body was on high alert. He stopped the vehicle and cut the engine, listening. The silence was broken only by the soft ping of the cooling engine and the whisper of wind through the tall grass. That's when he noticed the vultures, 3 of them, circling lazily over a patch of acacia trees about half a mile to the east. "Please don't be another one," he muttered, grabbing his rifle and medical kit. Too many animals had been lost to poachers lately, their bodies left to rot after being stripped of valuable parts: ivory, horns, pelts. Each death felt like a personal failure to Ethan, a reminder that despite all their efforts, the wilderness was still vulnerable to human greed. The grass was damp with dew as he made his way toward the acacia grove, moving quietly despite his size. The vultures' circles had tightened, indicating their target was nearby. As he approached, a familiar and sickening smell reached his nostrils: blood. But what he found wasn't what he expected. The lion lay in the shade of the largest acacia, its golden fur dulled by dust and dried blood. It was a male, young but fully grown, its black-tinged mane marking it as one of the park's prized Atlas lions. A deep gash ran along its right flank, the wound showing signs of infection. The animal's ribs pressed against its skin with each labored breath, suggesting it hadn't eaten in days. Ethan's hand tightened on his rifle. The wound was unmistakably from a snare trap, the cruel metal wires poachers used to catch animals. This lion had somehow managed to break free, but at a terrible cost. Protocol was clear in these situations: document the scene, report it, and let nature take its course. Direct intervention with predators was strongly discouraged. But as Ethan raised his radio, the lion's eyes opened, fixing him with a gaze that stopped him cold. There was something in those amber eyes, not just pain or fear, but an intelligence that seemed to pierce right through him. The lion made no attempt to move, no threatening growl. It simply watched him, as if waiting to see what he would do. "I can't just leave you here," Ethan said softly, knowing he was about to break about a dozen regulations. The lion's eyes followed him as he slowly reached for his medical kit. The outpost was only 3 miles away, a small, seldom-used cabin where rangers could take shelter during long patrols. It had basic medical supplies and, more importantly, privacy. If anyone found out he was trying to save a wild lion, he'd lose his job instantly. But first, he had to get the animal there. The lion was too weak to fight, but still dangerous. One swipe of those claws, even in its weakened state, could be fatal. Moving with careful precision, Ethan prepared a mild sedative, just enough to keep the lion calm during transport. As he approached with the dart gun, the big cat watched him but made no aggressive moves. It was almost as if it understood his intentions. "Easy now," Ethan murmured, his voice low and steady. "I'm trying to help you, friend." The dart found its mark, and within minutes, the lion's eyes began to droop. Ethan worked quickly, using a tarp from his vehicle to create a makeshift stretcher. The animal was lighter than it should have been, its powerful frame wasted by days without food. As he drove to the outpost, taking the bumpiest, least used trails to avoid being seen, Ethan's mind raced. He needed help, someone with veterinary experience who could be trusted to keep quiet. Dr. Anna Reynolds immediately came to mind. She'd helped him before with injured animals, and she understood that sometimes rules needed to be bent to do what was right. The lion stirred slightly as Ethan carried it into the cabin. In the better light, he could see just how close to death the animal had come. The wound was severely infected, and old scars suggested this wasn't its first encounter with poachers. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" Ethan said, carefully cleaning the worst of the dirt from around the wound. "We need to give you a name." He studied the lion's face, noting the unusual patterns in its mane, darker than typical, with streaks of deep gold running through the black. "Kali," he decided. "It means powerful in Swahili." As if in response to its new name, the lion's eyes opened briefly, meeting Ethan's gaze once more. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding that transcended the natural barriers between man and beast. Then the sedative took full effect, and Kali drifted into a healing sleep. Ethan's radio crackled, making him jump. "Eastern Sector, check-in." "Over." He grabbed the radio, fighting down his guilt. "Eastern Sector clear," he reported, knowing it was the first of many lies he would have to tell. "Nothing unusual to report." "Over." As he began treating the wound, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he just crossed a line, one that would change his life forever. What he didn't know was just how right he was, or that the lion he was saving would one day return the favor in ways he could never imagine. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the mist and revealing the vast savanna beyond the cabin windows. Somewhere out there, poachers were setting more traps, hunting more animals. But for now, in this hidden outpost, a ranger and a lion had formed an unlikely alliance, one that would eventually shake the foundations of the entire park. Dr. Anna Reynolds arrived at the outpost just before sunset, her ancient Land Rover kicking up clouds of red dust. She took one look at Kali and immediately understood why Ethan had called her. "This isn't just any lion," she said, examining the wound with practiced hands. "Look at his mane coloring, the size of his skull. He's one of the Atlas bloodline. There can't be more than 20 of them left in the whole park." Ethan watched as she cleaned and treated the infection, amazed at how Kali remained calm under her touch. The sedative had worn off hours ago, but the lion seemed to understand they were trying to help. "The wound is consistent with a new type of snare we've been seeing," Anna continued, her voice tight with anger. "Serrated wire, designed to cause maximum damage. These aren't local poachers, Ethan. This is professional work." Over the next few weeks, as Kali slowly regained his strength, Ethan and his fellow ranger Jonas began finding more evidence of organized poaching. Deep in the park's restricted areas, they discovered carefully hidden camps, complete with high-tech equipment and satellite phones. "Look at this," Jonas said one morning, holding up a spent bullet casing. "Custom ammunition, military grade. Whoever these people are, they're well-funded." Jonas was newer to the park, transferred from another reserve 6 months ago. He had a quiet intensity about him and a knowledge of poaching operations that seemed unusually detailed. When Ethan questioned him about it, Jonas would just shrug and say he'd seen a lot in his career. Back at the outpost, Kali's recovery was remarkable. The infection cleared, and his strength returned day by day. Anna's regular visits helped them document his progress while keeping the secret of his existence. "I've never seen anything like it," she told Ethan one evening as they watched Kali pace the enclosed area behind the cabin. "He should be trying to escape, showing aggression. Instead, it's almost like he's waiting for something." Ethan knew what she meant. Kali would watch him for hours, those intelligent eyes following his movements. Sometimes, in the quiet moments when Ethan would sit outside reading reports, the lion would lie nearby, close enough to touch but maintaining a respectful distance. The breakthrough in their investigation came unexpectedly. While tracking a group of elephants near the park's eastern border, Ethan and Jonas stumbled upon a freshly abandoned poaching camp. In their haste to leave, the poachers had left behind something crucial: a laptop, partially destroyed but still containing recoverable data. "You're not going to believe this," Jonas said, after working on the computer for hours. "These aren't just random hunting parties. They're working for Miguel Torres." The name sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Torres was infamous in conservation circles, a sophisticated poacher who had turned illegal hunting into a corporate enterprise. His operations spanned multiple countries, protected by a network of bribes and corrupt officials. "That explains the quality of their equipment," Ethan said, studying the recovered files. "But why here?" Why now? The answer came buried in encrypted emails. Torres had received a specific order: Atlas lions, particularly black-maned males like Callie. A wealthy collector was offering millions for trophies from the rare bloodline. It gets worse, Jonas added grimly. They have someone inside the park service. That's how they're avoiding our patrols. The revelation hit Ethan hard. Someone they worked with, someone they trusted, was helping Torres hunt these magnificent creatures to extinction. That evening, as Ethan shared the news with Anna at the outpost, Callie seemed to sense their distress. The lion moved closer than usual, his presence somehow reassuring despite his wild nature. We have to stop them, Anna said, absently running her hand through Callie's mane, something that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. But if there's a mole in the park service, who can we trust? Before Ethan could respond, Callie's head snapped up, his ears forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Seconds later, they heard it too, the distant sound of an approaching vehicle. No one knows about this outpost, Ethan whispered, reaching for his rifle. No one except. Headlights swept the cabin as a truck pulled up outside. Through the window, they could see 3 men getting out, carrying weapons that were definitely not standard park issue. The mole must have followed one of us, Anna breathed, her face pale in the gathering darkness. Callie's growl deepened, but Ethan gestured for him to stay back. The lion, incredibly, obeyed, melting into the shadows of the back room. The door burst open, and they found themselves staring down the barrels of automatic weapons. A tall man with a scarred face stepped forward, his smile cold and predatory. Ranger Carter, he said in heavily accented English. We've been wondering who's been interfering with our operations. And Dr. Reynolds too, what a surprise. Who are you? Ethan demanded, though he already knew the answer. Miguel Torres, at your service. The man gave a mock bow. And you have something that belongs to me. A very special lion that escaped our trap. The client was most disappointed. In the back room, Callie remained silent, but Ethan could feel his presence, like a coiled spring waiting to release. There's no lion here, Anna said firmly. This is just a research outpost. Torres laughed. No? Then you won't mind if we search the place. After all, harboring a wild predator would be against park regulations, wouldn't it? Could cost someone their job, or their life. As Torres's men moved further into the cabin, Ethan caught Anna's eye. They both knew what would happen if Callie was discovered. These men wouldn't hesitate to finish them all. But something else was happening, something none of them had noticed yet. Through the open door, carried on the evening breeze, came the unmistakable sound of more vehicles approaching. Torres heard it too. His smile faltered slightly as he turned toward the sound. And in that moment of distraction, a shadow detached itself from the darkness behind him, a shadow with amber eyes and very, very sharp teeth. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Callie launched himself at Torres's men with explosive force, his roar shaking the cabin's windows. The poachers scattered, their weapons firing wildly as panic overtook their training. In the chaos, Ethan grabbed Anna and pulled her behind an overturned table. Run! He shouted over the din. Get help! Torres himself remained eerily calm, backing toward the door with practiced efficiency. His scarred face showed no fear, only cold calculation as he raised his rifle. Callie was magnificent in his fury. The weak, wounded animal Ethan had found was gone, replaced by a force of nature. One of Torres's men went down screaming as massive paws sent him crashing into the wall. Another emptied his magazine into the ceiling as he scrambled to escape through a window. But they were professional killers, and panic quickly gave way to training. Torres barked orders in Spanish, and his remaining men began to move with coordinated purpose, trying to flank the lion. No! Ethan launched himself at the nearest poacher, sending them both crashing into a shelf of supplies. They grappled in the darkness, each fighting for control of the man's weapon. Through the open door, he could see Anna making a run for her Land Rover. Good. At least she would be safe. More vehicles were approaching, hopefully park rangers responding to the gunfire. A sharp crack split the air, followed by a sound Ethan had prayed he would never hear, Callie's roar of pain. The lion staggered, blood darkening his golden fur where Torres's bullet had found its mark. "Magnificent," Torres said, almost reverently, as he leveled his rifle for a finishing shot. "The client will pay double for this one." Ethan broke free from his struggle and threw himself forward, catching Torres's rifle just as it fired. The bullet went wide, splintering the cabin wall. They fought for control of the weapon, but Torres was stronger than he looked. With a practiced twist, he sent Ethan sprawling. "Enough!" Torres's voice cut through the chaos. The next shot goes through the ranger's head. Callie, preparing to pounce again despite his wound, froze at the sight of Torres's rifle pressed against Ethan's temple. The lion's eyes, still blazing with battle fury, met Ethan's. In that moment, an understanding passed between them. "Don't," Ethan whispered. But it was too late. Callie turned and crashed through the cabin's window in a shower of glass, disappearing into the darkness beyond. Torres's men fired after him, but the night had swallowed the lion completely. "Pity," Torres sighed, his rifle never wavering from Ethan's head. "But perhaps it's better this way. The hunt is always more satisfying than a simple finish." The approaching vehicles turned out not to be rangers but more of Torres's men. They quickly secured the area, their movements suggesting military training. Ethan's heart sank as he realized this had been a carefully planned operation. The mole must have been watching them for weeks, waiting for the right moment to strike. "You should have minded your own business, Ranger Carter," Torres said conversationally as his men zip-tied Ethan's hands. "Some animals are meant to die. It's simply economics. They're not just animals." Ethan spat, tasting blood from a split lip. "They're part of something bigger than your blood money." Torres laughed. "Such passion. But passion doesn't change reality. There will always be men willing to pay for trophies, and men willing to provide them." His face hardened. "And men willing to eliminate obstacles." They dragged Ethan outside, where more vehicles had arrived. His trained eye counted at least 10 men, all heavily armed. This was no simple poaching operation, it was a small army. "Your friend, the good doctor, will be found soon enough," Torres continued. "As for the lion, well, wounded animals leave clear trails. By morning I'll have my trophy and you." He smiled coldly. "You will have learned the price of interference." They forced Ethan into the back of a rugged transport truck. As they drove deeper into the park, he caught glimpses of other vehicles paralleling their route, a coordinated operation spreading out to search for Callie. The truck stopped in a remote area Ethan recognized as Lion's Ridge, known for its maze of narrow ravines. Torres's men dragged him to a shallow cave, securing his bonds to a sturdy root. "A fitting place, no?" Torres gestured at the surrounding wilderness. "You love this land so much, Ranger Carter. Now you can become part of it." He checked his watch. "The predators will pick up your scent within hours. If you're lucky, your lion friend will find you first. Though in his condition." He shrugged. "Either way, it should be interesting. You won't get away with this," Ethan said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "The Park Service will." "Will what? Launch an investigation? With their budget cuts and corrupt officials?" Torres laughed again. "By the time anyone even notices you're missing, I'll be on a private jet with my trophies, and you'll be nothing but scattered bones." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But I want you to die knowing something, Ranger. Your noble mission to protect these animals? It was doomed from the start. We own this park now. Every ranger, every checkpoint, every camera, we see it all. Your death will serve as a message to others who might interfere." With that, Torres and his men departed, leaving Ethan alone in the growing darkness. The sounds of their vehicles faded, replaced by the normal noises of the African night, and something else. Something that made his blood run cold. Hyenas. Their distinctive whooping calls echoed through the ravines, growing closer. As the moon rose over Lion's Ridge, Ethan tested his bonds again, knowing it was useless. Somewhere out there, Callie was bleeding, hunted. And here he was, unable to help, about to become another statistic in the endless war between protectors and poachers. The hyenas were getting closer. But it wasn't their approach that worried him most. It was the knowledge that Torres was right. The park system was compromised, corruption ran deep, and he had seriously underestimated what he was up against. Even if by some miracle he survived this night, how could one ranger stand against an organization with this much power? A nearby rock clattered down the ravine, followed by a sound that made Ethan's heart stop, the soft pad of large feet on stone. Something was coming. And in the silver moonlight he couldn't tell if it was rescue or death approaching through the shadows. The hyenas' calls grew closer, their eerie laughter echoing off the ravine walls. Ethan pulled against his bonds until his wrists bled, but the restraints held firm. The moon cast strange shadows across the rocky ground, making every movement seem like an approaching predator. A pebble clattered down the slope. Then another. Something large was making its way down the ravine wall, moving with deliberate care. Ethan held his breath, straining to see through the darkness. A shape emerged from the shadows, and Ethan's heart nearly stopped. Callie. The lion's coat was matted with blood where Torres's bullet had struck him, but his eyes burned with the same fierce intelligence Ethan had seen that first day. He moved with a slight limp, yet there was nothing weak about his presence. "You came back," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Callie approached slowly, those amber eyes fixed on Ethan's bonds. The hyenas' calls suddenly went quiet. They knew a superior predator had entered their territory. The lion's massive head lowered, and Ethan felt hot breath on his hands as Callie examined the zip ties. Then, with surgical precision, Callie began to work at the restraints with his teeth. It was slow, careful work. One slip of those powerful jaws could sever Ethan's hands instead of his bonds. But there was no hesitation, no uncertainty in the lion's movements. A sharp crack, and Ethan's hands were free. He barely had time to rub his bloody wrists before Callie's head snapped up, ears forward. In the distance, they could hear the rumble of approaching vehicles. "Torres," Ethan muttered. "Coming to check if the hyenas finished the job." Callie growled low in his throat, the sound vibrating through the ground. But Ethan knew the lion was in no condition for another fight. The bullet wound, though not immediately fatal, had taken its toll. "We need to move," Ethan said, forcing himself to think like a ranger instead of a man amazed by a lion's loyalty. "They'll have night vision equipment, infrared scanners." As if understanding, Callie turned and began moving deeper into the ravine system. Ethan followed, trusting the lion's instincts. They navigated through narrow passages where the moonlight barely penetrated, Callie's bulk somehow squeezing through gaps that seemed too small for him. The sounds of vehicles grew louder, accompanied by voices and the distinctive click of weapons being readied. Flashlight beams swept the higher ridges as Torres's men began their search. "The tracks lead this way. Blood trail, the lion's hurt. Find them both. Mr. Torres wants the ranger's body and the lion's head." Ethan and Callie pressed themselves into a shallow cave as a beam of light passed overhead. The lion's breathing was labored now, the exertion clearly taking its toll on his injured body. Yet he remained alert, his eyes tracking every movement above them. A radio crackled nearby. "Team 2, check the lower ravine. The hyenas were here earlier. Maybe they did our work for us." Footsteps crunched on loose rock just above their hiding place. Callie's muscles tensed, ready to defend despite his wounds. Ethan placed a gentle hand on the lion's shoulder, silently urging him to wait. The moment seemed to stretch forever. Then the footsteps moved away, and both man and lion released their held breath. But their relief was short-lived. A sudden commotion erupted above, shouts of surprise and fear, followed by gunfire. Something was happening up there, something that had nothing to do with them. "Contact! Multiple contacts!" A voice screamed over the radio. "They're park rangers! Someone tipped them." The transmission cut off in a burst of static. More gunfire erupted, accompanied by the distinctive sound of Park Service vehicles. Through gaps in the rocks, Ethan caught glimpses of chaos. Torres's men scrambling for cover as Rangers descended on their position. "Dr. Reynolds," Ethan realized aloud. She made it. She brought help. A familiar voice carried across the ravine. "Ethan! If you can hear me, signal your position." It was Jonas, and he sounded closer than the others. But before Ethan could respond, Callie's head snapped toward a sound only he could hear. The lion's warning growl came just seconds before a figure dropped into their hiding place. Miguel Torres landed in a crouch, his rifle aimed squarely at Ethan's chest. The poacher's composed facade had cracked, replaced by desperate fury. "You," he snarled. "You ruined everything. My operation, my contacts, my reputation." His finger tightened on the trigger. "At least I'll have the satisfaction of..." Callie moved faster than seemed possible for an injured animal. One moment he was beside Ethan, the next he was airborne, 300 pounds of muscle and fury launching at Torres. The poacher's rifle went off, the shot going wild as lion and man crashed together. What followed was pure chaos. Torres screamed, not in fear but in rage, as he fought with desperate strength. His free hand found a knife, the blade flashing in the darkness. Callie roared in pain as steel met flesh, but he didn't release his grip. Ethan scrambled for the fallen rifle, but Torres kicked it away, still grappling with the lion. Man and beast rolled dangerously close to the ravine's edge, locked in a deadly dance. "Ethan!" Jonas's voice was very close now. "Where are you?" But Ethan couldn't respond. He could only watch in horror as Torres, with one final burst of strength, pulled something from his belt, a compact pistol, pressed directly against Callie's throat. Time seemed to slow down. Ethan saw Torres's triumphant grin, saw his finger tightening on the trigger, saw Callie's amber eyes flash with something that looked almost like acceptance. And then Ethan did the only thing he could do. He jumped. His shoulder slammed into Torres just as the pistol fired. The impact sent all three of them, man, lion, and poacher, over the edge of the ravine. They tumbled through space, the ground rushing up to meet them. The last thing Ethan saw before darkness took him was Callie's massive form twisting in midair, as if the lion was trying to position himself between Ethan and the approaching ground. Then everything went black. The first thing Ethan became aware of was pain, deep, throbbing pain that seemed to radiate from every part of his body. The second was a familiar voice. "He's waking up. Ethan? Can you hear me?" Anna's face swam into focus above him. He was lying in what appeared to be a hospital room, the harsh fluorescent lights making him squint. Various machines beeped steadily around him. "Callie," he tried to say, but his throat was too dry. Anna seemed to understand anyway. "The lion survived," she said quickly. "It's a miracle, really. The fall should have finished you both. Instead..." She shook her head in amazement. "Somehow he managed to take the brunt of the impact. The Rangers found him curled around you at the bottom of the ravine, still trying to protect you even though he was barely conscious." Relief flooded through Ethan, followed quickly by concern. "Where is he?" "At a secure veterinary facility. Jonas is overseeing his care personally." She smiled. "You've been out for 3 days, but a lot has happened. You might want to brace yourself." The door opened, and Chief Warden Matthews entered, followed by 2 people in official-looking suits. "Good to see you awake, Carter," Matthews said. "These are Agents Chin and Rodriguez from Interpol. They have some questions about Miguel Torres." "Torres?" Ethan remembered suddenly. "The fall. Dead?" Agent Chin said crisply. "But his death has opened a Pandora's box that sent shockwaves through the illegal wildlife trade." Over the next hour, they filled Ethan in on what had happened. The evidence from Torres's laptop, combined with documents found in his vehicles, had exposed a network far larger than anyone had imagined. Corrupt officials, smuggling routes, client lists, it was all there. "But here's where it gets interesting," Agent Rodriguez added. "Jonas wasn't just a ranger. He was our undercover operative, placed in the park 6 months ago when we first got wind of Torres's operation." Ethan processed this revelation slowly. It explained Jonas's detailed knowledge of poaching operations, his strategic thinking. Does this mean, was he the one who helped Anna bring the Rangers that night? Actually, no, Matthews interjected. That was me. Anna reached me directly, bypassing normal channels because she suspected the corruption went high up in park management. She was right. The chief warden's face darkened. We've arrested 6 senior park officials who were on Torres's payroll. The rot went deeper than any of us knew. But thanks to you and that remarkable lion, we've finally exposed it. The publicity has been intense, Agent Chen added. A ranger and a lion he saved, working together to bring down an international poaching ring? The media is calling it a modern-day fairy tale. Conservation groups worldwide are using the story to push for stronger anti-poaching measures. Ethan listened as they detailed the fallout. Emergency funding approved for park security, new anti-corruption measures being implemented, international arrest warrants issued for Torres's clients. But his mind kept returning to Callie. When can I see him? The others exchanged glances. That's complicated, Anna said carefully. The facility where he's recovering is excellent, but he's not doing well. The physical injuries are healing, but... She hesitated. He's refusing food, growing aggressive with the staff. It's like he's given up. Take me to him, Ethan said, trying to sit up despite the pain. No. You can barely walk, Matthews protested. Then get me a wheelchair. An hour later, after much argument and the signing of multiple liability waivers, Ethan was being wheeled into a secure veterinary compound. Through a reinforced window, he could see Callie lying in a large enclosure, his massive frame diminished somehow, his eyes dull and disinterested. He's lost the will to live, the facility's head veterinarian explained. We see it sometimes with wild animals in captivity. Even though we're trying to help him, the confinement is breaking his spirit. Let me in there, Ethan said. Absolutely not, the vet refused. He's still a wild animal, and in his current state. He's my friend, Ethan interrupted. And he needs me. Perhaps it was the quiet certainty in his voice, or maybe just the extraordinary circumstances of their story, but eventually they agreed. With multiple tranquilizer rifles trained on the enclosure, they helped Ethan to the gate. The moment he stepped inside, Callie's head lifted. Those amber eyes focused on him with an intensity that took his breath away. For a long moment neither moved. Then, slowly, painfully, Callie rose to his feet. The great lion limped toward him, and Ethan could hear the veterinary staff tensing behind him, their weapons ready. But there was no need. When Callie reached him, the lion simply pressed his massive head against Ethan's leg, a low rumble, not quite a purr, but something close, vibrating through his body. I've got you, friend, Ethan murmured, carefully placing his hand on Callie's mane. We made it. We both made it. From that moment, Callie's recovery accelerated dramatically. His wounds healed, his strength returned, and that fierce intelligence blazed again in his eyes. But more importantly, his wild spirit rekindled. He's ready, Ethan told Anna a week later, watching Callie pace restlessly in his enclosure. He needs to be free. The Park Service wants to radio collar him, she said. For research, they say, but really they want to turn him into a symbol, the lion who helped bring down a poaching empire. Ethan shook his head. No collars. No tracking. He's given us enough. As they made plans for Callie's release, more news arrived about the impact of their case. Torres's client list had included powerful figures worldwide, and their exposure was creating a domino effect of resignations and arrests. Conservation organizations were receiving record donations, and new legislation was being fast-tracked to protect endangered species. But for Ethan, none of that mattered as much as the knowledge that soon, Callie would be free again. Free to roam the savannah, to live as a wild creature should. Even if that meant saying goodbye to one of the most remarkable friendships he had ever known. The dawn mist rolled across the savannah, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber, the same colors as Callie's eyes. Ethan stood beside the transport cage, his hand resting on the metal bars as the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon. They had chosen this location carefully, deep within the park's protected zone, far from any human settlements or known poaching routes. "Everything's ready," Anna said softly, joining him. She handed him a tablet showing live feeds from hidden cameras in the surrounding area. "The anti-poaching units are in position. No one will interfere with his release." Jonas appeared on Ethan's other side, his undercover status now officially ended. "The new security measures are all active. Motion sensors, drone patrols, upgraded ranger stations. This entire sector is probably the safest place in Africa for a lion right now." But Ethan barely heard them. His attention was fixed on Callie, who stood calmly in the transport cage, those intelligent eyes taking in every detail of his surroundings. The lion's wounds had healed completely, leaving only faint scars beneath his magnificent mane. He looked powerful, majestic, and completely wild. "It's time," Ethan said, moving to the cage door. The others stepped back, giving them space for this final moment. Ethan's fingers found the release mechanism, but he paused, overwhelmed by the significance of what was about to happen. "You saved my life," he told Callie quietly. "More than that, you helped us protect countless other animals. But now you need to be what you truly are, free." As if understanding his words, Callie met his gaze one last time. In those amber eyes, Ethan saw something that transcended the normal boundaries between human and animal, a connection forged through mutual trust and sacrifice. The cage door swung open. Callie stepped out slowly, his movements graceful and deliberate. He paused just outside the cage, lifting his head to scent the wind. The savanna stretched before him, wild and limitless, calling to his true nature. But then the great lion did something unexpected. Instead of running toward freedom, he turned and walked back to Ethan. For one heart-stopping moment, man and beast stood face to face, separated by nothing but air and trust. Callie leaned forward and pressed his forehead against Ethan's chest, a gesture of affection that brought tears to the ranger's eyes. Then, as suddenly as it had happened, the moment passed. The lion turned and began walking toward the open savanna, his powerful stride carrying him toward his destiny. At the crest of a small hill, Callie paused. The rising sun silhouetted his magnificent form, making his mane glow like living fire. He lifted his head and released a roar that seemed to shake the very earth, not a cry of aggression or territory, but a declaration of freedom. Then he was gone, disappearing into the golden grass like a spirit returning to the wild. "Well," Anna said, wiping tears from her eyes, "that's going to be hard to explain in my official report." "Then don't," Jonas suggested. "Some things are better left as mysteries." But Callie's story was far from over. In the months that followed, his legend grew. Other rangers reported seeing him patrolling the boundaries of his territory, which mysteriously seemed to coincide with the park's most vulnerable areas. Poacher camps were found abandoned, their occupants fled after encountering a massive lion that showed no fear of humans or their weapons. More remarkably, other lions began to gather in the area. Within a year, a pride had formed around Callie, his bloodline ensuring the survival of the rare Atlas genes. Under his protection, the local lion population began to recover for the first time in decades. The impact of their story reached far beyond the park's borders. The exposure of Torres's network had created a worldwide movement for wildlife protection. New laws were passed, funding increased, and public awareness soared. Conservation groups used the tale of the ranger and the lion to inspire a new generation of wildlife defenders. Ethan remained at his post, but things were different now. The Park Service had been reformed from the ground up, with new leadership and strict anti-corruption measures. He was promoted to Chief of Anti-Poaching Operations, working alongside Jonas to implement innovative protection strategies. "Look at this," Anna said one evening, showing him footage from a research drone. The video showed Callie leading his pride, 6 cubs tumbling playfully around his feet. The great lion looked magnificent, a true king of the savannah, protecting his family and territory with the same fierce dedication he had once shown to a wounded ranger. "He was never meant to be tame," Ethan said, smiling at the image. But he taught us something important, that true strength lies not in dominance, but in protection. In standing up for those who can't protect themselves. As if to emphasize his words, a distant roar echoed across the savannah. The researchers had mapped Kelly's territory, noting how he systematically patrolled the areas most vulnerable to poaching. Some swore they had seen him watching the ranger patrols, as if coordinating his movements with theirs. You know, Jonas said thoughtfully, in all my years undercover, I've seen some incredible things. But I've never seen anything like the bond you two share. We don't share a bond anymore, Ethan corrected him. He's wild, free, exactly as he should be. But sometimes, on his nighttime patrols, Ethan would catch a glimpse of movement in the darkness, a flash of amber eyes, a silent shadow moving parallel to his vehicle. And he would smile, knowing that in their own ways, they were still doing the same work, protecting this land and its creatures. The story of the ranger and the lion became a legend in the park service. New recruits would hear about the lion who saved a man's life, and the man who returned the favor by helping bring down an international poaching ring. Some dismissed it as a tall tale, but those who knew the truth understood its deeper meaning. In the end, it wasn't just about a man saving a lion, or a lion saving a man. It was about the extraordinary things that become possible when beings from different worlds choose to trust each other, to protect each other, to fight for something larger than themselves. And somewhere out in the vast African night, a lion with battle scars and amber eyes continued his endless patrol, a guardian of the wild, proof that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who return to their true nature, forever changed but forever free.